Hi, I'm Armand Budish. I'm the Mandel Executive in Residence at the Levin College here at Cleveland State University. We're doing a series of video casts taking a look behind the scenes at some of the most important issues that are facing Cleveland and urban areas generally. Today we're looking at one aspect of violent crime. We've been doing a series on violent crime and how it's increased and what we can do about it. Today we're looking at rape and how DNA technology allows the authorities to really go after people who commit these violent crimes. So with me is one of the nationally known experts, Rachel Lovell, Dr. Rachel Lovell. Dr. Rachel, why don't you tell us about what your background is?
Thanks for having me. So I'm an assistant professor here at Cleveland State University, professor of criminology, and I'm the director of the Criminology Research Center. My area of specialization is in victimology, so I primarily focus on victims of crime and looking at all types of violent crime and forensic aspects of crime, so DNA, shell casings, so gun crime, as well as looking at primarily crimes that happen to women and girls, so gender-based crime, sexual assault, human trafficking, and intimate partner violence.
Technology plays an increasing role in helping us stop crime or catch criminals. Tell us about what can be done with DNA evidence.
So yes, DNA evidence is increasingly being used to help solve crime when you don't know who the offender is, but it's also extremely useful to help corroborate a victim's statements or help corroborate what the victim or what police think might happen. So it's not just in cases where they don't know who the suspect is, but they might know who the suspect is, but it may help corroborate a victim or a suspect statement in a case of maybe an exoneration.
What's a rape kit?
Okay, so a rape kit is when a victim goes to the hospital often or some type of medical setting and reports that they've been a victim of a crime. In that case, they get medical treatment or for the injuries that they may have, and could have types of medicine and other types of things to treat injuries, medicine to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, prevent pregnancy, things like that. But as part of it, they have the option to also have evidence collected from their bodies and from their clothing to preserve the evidence of the rape, of the sexual assault. So from that, a kit is actually just a box which has paperwork as well as envelopes and swabs and other types of things that a trained person within that hospital setting would be collecting from that survivor, from that victim.
Is it just semen, or is there other things that are collected?
There's lots of other things that are collected. So semen, it often is a big part of it because men are more likely to sexually assault, but not always. And semen isn't always involved in sexual assault. So it can be fingernail scrapings. It can be pubic comb hair. They can comb the pubic hair so they can get hair samples. Increasingly is being used, which is called touch DNA, which is where it's not bodily fluids. Bodily fluids would be blood, semen, or saliva. So in this case, touch DNA is where they collect it, where someone has touched or licked a part of the body. So they collect that from the part of the body where someone may have scraped somebody or touched somebody, heavily touched somebody. So you can collect DNA just from the outside of somebody's skin.
So DNA can be in all sorts of things. And we see all these, TV shows now where they get DNA from the things you would never expect, a hairbrush, DNA, So samples are collected, and then how does a sample of hair turn into DNA? How do they know what the DNA is?
So it depends, I think, on the type of hair and other types of things that are really way beyond often my area of specialization because I'm not a chemist. But yeah, so they take various levels of sampling, depending on what kind of sample it is, and they submit that to a forensic lab. And as part of that testing, they extract the DNA profile from that evidence. So it could be fingernail scraping, so they would collect the DNA under the scraping. It would be, a vaginal swab or an oral swab or an anal swab. They would collect the DNA from that cotton in the swab, from clothing that might have DNA on it, from what was collected on the skin. And then they extract the DNA profile from that and then create a profile from that and then take that unique profile and then put it into a federal DNA database and see.
Is that CODIS?
That is CODIS. So it's called the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. And they put it into CODIS, which is a federal system. So all the states feed into a federal system and they see if there's any match to a DNA profile in that one.
Do you have any idea how many people's DNA is in this CODIS system? Is it hundreds, thousands, or millions?
So there's about 20 million offender profiles, meaning here's Rachel Lovell, I'm going to swab her cheek, I get a unique profile, I'm going to put her profile into CODIS. So there's about 20 million of those. And then there's about 1 million or so profiles that are called forensic profiles. So those are profiles from crime scenes. So that would be like, for example, a rape kit. So it is from somebody, but it's not necessarily from Rachel Lovell. It could be from, evidence left at a scene and they've had a DNA profile, but they may not know who that person is.
The DNA that's in this national database, the CODIS database, do they have names of people attached to that?
The offender side has that. The forensic side but may not necessarily have that.
So if there's DNA that's taken from somebody who's a victim and plugged into this system, it can be compared, the DNA from the perpetrator, and the person who committed the crime, can be compared to the DNA in this database, and if it's a match, they can typically then find out whose DNA this was.
Yes. So they take the DNA from the victim, but the victim's DNA, they extract the suspect's DNA from the victim's DNA. So it is important to know that the victim's DNA never goes into CODIS. So victim's DNA doesn't go into CODIS, just the offender one, or the suspect's one. And so it can go in there, and then it potentially has the opportunity to match with somebody that's in the database and then produces this match, which could then give you a name.
So we're talking here about victims of rape.
Correct.
People whose DNA is in the CODIS system don't necessarily have to be involved with a rape, either a rapist or anything else. These are people who may have committed any crimes?
Correct. So every single state, plus the District of Columbia, has a statute that says that if you've been convicted of a felony, your DNA has to be collected and put into the federal, into your state database that feeds into the federal one. Ohio is one of, I think, 17 states that also has a statute where if you are arrested for a felony, you also arrested and or convicted for a felony, you also get put into this federal DNA database. So it could be for any, in Ohio, it could be for any felony.
I understand that there were a lot of cold rape kits, rape kits that were collected but never tested or compared to CODIS. They had just been piled up and stored someplace. First of all, how long does the DNA in those kits last?
So there were, Cleveland has about 10 to 11,000. They had about 11,000 untested kits. But Cleveland is not alone in that. Nationwide, was about 300,000 untested rape kits, an estimated 300,000 rape kits, and the U.S. is really leading the world in being able to address their untested kits.
I understand Cleveland has brought those down, that number of
So,
untested kits.
So Cleveland has finished all the untested kits.
There's no more backlog?
There is no more backlog. Cleveland has finished up the very last of testing the ones that were outside of the statute of limitations. For these kits, that was 20 years. And so those were the kits that they decided to test last, since those were the ones that they couldn't prosecute.
But the DNA can last 20 years or more?
The DNA, if they are stored well, and apparently, from what I've been told, if you store it fairly well and you don't expose it to the elements, in particular mold and other sorts of things, DNA can last for decades. It does degrade over time, and so there is a sort of, diminishing return for being able to test because the DNA does degrade. Additionally, but probably more importantly, the DNA collection practices weren't nearly as good as they are now. So they just didn't collect DNA nearly as well or as much as they do now. So they've just improved how they've collected and where they collect and all these sorts of things now than they did then. And so when you combine those two things, some of these older kits are just less likely to have DNA left in them if they ever did.
So you go through these old kits. They can be up to 20 years old.
Some of them, I think in Cleveland, they date back to the early 80s, late 70s.
It's longer than 20 years. But 20 years is the statute of limitations for rape?
In Ohio, yes.
So if you went back 15, 18 years and you got a match, then you can go after the perpetrator even 18 years later?
Yes. Yes.
Is that done? I mean,
yes.
What's actually the practice been?
Yes. So the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office has been the one since 2013 that has led this initiative. It is leading the nation in the number of prosecutions as a result of testing their backlog rape kits, and has been very successful in getting convictions from these untested kits. And so, if in particular, when you really put better resources, when you have better trained personnel, and you make a concerted effort and have the political will to really follow up and test and have better practices, I think with better training and all those sorts of things that the federal dollars have really allowed through the federal sexual assault kit initiative, you're seeing significant lessons learned in being able to prosecute these cases.
The amount of money that it takes to create a rape kit, study it, review it, test it, what are we talking about?
So we've published a cost-benefit study on this. So I actually I have the exact numbers because I had to write a paper. I published a paper on it.
Great. We have the right person.
Yeah, that's
here
right.
For
Yeah,
our
so I've
interview.
actually published, a study on this. It's a huge cost savings to our community. So upwards
How
of
is it
about
a cost savings?
$30 million to our community from just addressing, just the initiative itself in Cleveland has saved our community $30 million.
Where's
in preventing future rapes from really addressing and prosecuting these cases. So the testing itself is about $500. Having someone, read the lab results, write a lab report is about $1,500 altogether. So you're talking, not that much money for each kit. Then you're talking about investigating and prosecuting a couple thousand more. Prosecuting we didn't estimate because that cost is already cost that our society would expect someone to do. Like we would expect someone to prosecute something, but investigating and providing victim advocacy were additional costs to our community to do this. So it costs, upwards of $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how you estimate it, to test, to investigate, and to provide support to the survivor. As a result of that, you see these massive gains in being able to prosecute these offenders.
Rapists, if I'm understanding you, tend to be more serial criminals? In other words, if you rape once, you're more likely to rape a second or third time. Is that accurate?
Correct.
So when you identify somebody who's committed a rape 15, 17 years ago, chances are they may have done more that's not yet been identified.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the biggest things that we've learned from the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative in our jurisdiction and in our research, but also nationwide as well, that really before the testing of the rape kits that really people wouldn't have known. And the reason for that is that when you didn't test the kits, you couldn't have seen the full extent of their criminal history because you didn't test the kits. Once you tested the kits and looked at their criminal histories, our research shows that 40% of these, at least 40% of these, are serial sex offenders that we can confirm that they are, which matches up almost exactly to what Detroit found with their sexual assault kit initiative. These estimates are much higher than the official recidivism rates that you'll see of about 5%. So these rates are much higher and still underestimates because these are only rape kits that we're talking about. This isn't all of their criminal history or all the rapes that they committed, just those that they were tied to by DNA to a backlog rape kit, and still we're finding serial offending at 40%.
If Joe Smith is picked up for not paying his speeding tickets, some minor crime, does he get swabbed? Do they take his DNA? Which criminals do they test? Test, but take DNA samples from?
If you are arrested or arraigned, sometimes not all people who are arrested, not all people who are actually arrested on the scene. Sometimes you're just charged or arraigned. Like you're not charged, you're just told that you're going to be charged, and then you show up to court for felonies. So no, not the person who gets minor misdemeanors, pulled over for a speeding ticket. All those are not swabbable offenses. So it has to be a felony.
So like what? Give me examples of who would get swabbed.
Felony drug offenses, you could be for felony theft, you could be for rape, you could be for felony domestic violence, but felony domestic violence has to have a certain number of prior offenses before you move over into that
But
realm.
a robbery, a burglary, those people get swabbed.
Those people get swabbed, correct.
So, and then once they're swabbed, they're in the big database. And if somebody looks at an old rape kit and there's a match, that person, even though they didn't do the rape in the last 15 years that we know about, they could still be arrested for that rape.
Correct. They stay in there. They aren't removed. At least in Ohio, they can be removed if you are found not guilty, or your case is expunged. You can petition to have your DNA removed from that, from the database, but you have to petition in Ohio. In some states, it's automatic that your DNA gets removed if you are found not guilty or your case is expunged. But in Ohio, you have to petition for that. But it can come out if that case that you were swabbed for. Now, if you were found guilty and you were then, and that you were found guilty, then that DNA stays in there.
It's my understanding that there were some felons that should have been swabbed that were never swabbed. Was that a common problem?
Yeah, so Cleveland and Cuyahoga County has a significant issue with what's called owed DNA, O-W-E-D. Like they owe it, they should have been swabbed, but they were not. And Cleveland is not alone in that. As part of the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, they provided money to jurisdictions to address this issue. It was a known issue for a long time with labs. They knew what they called missed samples.
How do you fix that?
So we've been working for the last 7.5 years in Cuyahoga County to work to address it.
Can you go back and take a swab?
No. Yeah, so state law says that if you miss it, if they're not under court supervision, like probation, parole, have a pending case, then you can't go back. You can't compel them to give that. So if you miss it, then you have to wait for them to come back into the criminal justice system. And so Cleveland had about 15,000 individuals over the span of 7 years who had been missed, which we estimated was between 1 in every 2 to 1 in every 5 people were missed within that span of time, which is a significant number of people who should have been swabbed. So over the past 7.5 years, we've been working to see what happens and follow these people and see if we can get them in the database, and then see what.
But you can't get them in by just going back
right.
and saying,
so
I
we're
want
just
you.
So we're just waiting to see if they come back, and then when they do come back, making sure they're swabbed the second time.
With your work, I understand. Today we're hearing about AI, artificial
right.
intelligence, all the time in different areas. I understand you've worked with AI in your work with these kits. Tell me about how that is.
Yeah, so we recently completed a National Institute of Justice grant where we tried to see if we could teach a computer to pick up innuendo, or what we called signaling, in rape reports, to see if we could see about victims' credibility, to see if we could teach the computer to read the rape reports and pick out those where they may be saying something about victims' credibility, and if that would predict if the case moved forward or not.
I mean, victims of
rape
aren't always telling the truth?
No, we were trying to see if the reports, if the way that the report was written might have made a difference in what happened to the case.
Report by the who?
By the police officer.
So
more specifically, by the patrol officer.
So if the patrol officer, but he wouldn't make up facts. You're talking about he makes a mistake or something?
No, not necessarily, but the way that he or she wrote the report.
What does that mean? The way he wrote?
Yeah. So as part of our research, we read these reports, and we would read them and be like, I wonder why that is in the report. Like, why are they mentioning this? Or like, why is this statement in here? But there's no context for why they're putting that. It seems like they're blaming the victim or trying to set them up to say that they're like lying here. But they didn't say that they're lying. They're just kind of insinuating that they're lying, like signaling that they're lying, but they're not outright stating that they're lying. So we were trying to see if we could teach the computer to do that on a massive scale with like 6,000 rape reports, something that a human just couldn't do, or a human just couldn't pick up.
So if you identify, I would suggest that that's bias in
Correct.
reporting by the patrol officer,
Yeah.
whoever wrote up the report. What do you do with that?
Yeah, and I think some of it was, bias, intentional or not. We weren't necessarily making insinuations that they meant to write that or that they didn't. That it was just the way that they were writing, and really trying to make the point that like the way that the police reports are written, that they make such a big difference in what happens to the case, because that had never really been done, not on a scale like this. And so that's what we did find. So what we did find was that yes, the way that they are written made the difference into what happened with the cases. And so we have recommendations for law enforcement on really going counter to how many of them are taught how to write reports. So many of them are taught to write,
So when you find bias, does that suggest that sometimes the case wasn't pursued because of the bias?
Correct.
I see.
Or at least influenced what happened with the case, and that those that were written with more detail from the victim's perspective, that really captured the nature, the really horrible nature of the rape, were more likely to move forward, and that those that were written in a more like very neutrally toned were also ways that officers were more likely to write negative statements about victims. So they wrote the negative statements in factual ways, like victim is a known prostitute, or victim can't remember, or things like that.
Dr. Lovell, I can see why you're considered one of the nation's experts in this field. Obviously, you know it backwards and forwards, and some of the work you've done has been groundbreaking, has really been significant in helping to stem crime and future crime. So thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for coming in and informing our audience today with this great facts.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching.